I told my mom about you. Her reaction shocked me. I didn't plan to tell my mom about you that day. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't rehearsed. It happened the way most important moments do, quietly in between ordinary conversation when defenses are down and honesty slips out without asking for permission. I didn't even say your name at first. I just said there's someone. That was enough to change the room. My mom knows me better than most people. She knows how rarely I speak without intention. She knows I don't bring things up unless they've already settled inside me. So when I said that, she didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions immediately. And that pause told me something. I wasn't just sharing information. I was revealing alignment. I told her about you slowly, not details, not stories meant to impress, just the way my life felt different now, quieter, more focused. I told her how my days felt steadier, how my thoughts didn't scatter the way they used to, how I wasn't searching or comparing anymore. I expected curiosity, I expected concern, I even expected skepticism. What I didn't expect was silence. She listened without nodding, without smiling, without reacting at all. That silence stretched longer than comfort usually allows. And for a moment I wondered if I'd misread the room, if I'd spoken too soon, if maybe I was about to hear something that would force me to question what I already felt. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. She said, "You sound settled, not excited, not distracted, not confused. Settled." That word hit differently. My mom has seen every version of me, the restless ones, the ambitious ones, the uncertain ones, the versions that chased intensity and called it purpose. She's watched me build, fail, restart, refine, and she's never used that word before. I didn't defend anything. I didn't explain further. I just let that observation sit between us because it was accurate. And accuracy doesn't need reinforcement. Then she asked, "Does she make you feel calm, or do you just feel calm around her?" That question wasn't emotional. It was precise. I told her the truth. I said it wasn't about how you made me feel, it was about how little I had to manage myself around you. I wasn't performing, I wasn't compensating, I wasn't editing, I was just present. And presence didn't feel risky. My mom nodded once slowly like she was checking something off internally. She said, "That's how I knew about your father." That's when her reaction shocked me. She didn't warn me, she didn't protect me, she didn't question timing or readiness. She recognized the pattern. She told me that when something is real, it doesn't demand validation. It doesn't rush you forward or pull you backward. It lets you stand where you are without doubt. And she said she could hear that in my voice. I hadn't even noticed my voice had changed. She didn't ask what you did. She didn't ask where you lived. She didn't ask what the future looked like. She asked one thing. "Do you feel like you're building, or are you still stabilizing?" I told her I was building, and she smiled. Not the polite kind, the relieved kind. That smile said more than any advice ever could. She said something else then, something that stayed with me long after the conversation ended. She said, "When a man tells his mother about a woman without excitement or fear, it usually means he's already made room for her." Made room. That phrase mattered. It comes from clarity, from knowing what doesn't belong anymore, from letting go of distractions that once felt important, but no longer fit. I realized in that moment that telling my mom about you wasn't about introducing someone new into my life. It was about acknowledging that something had already integrated itself quietly. Her reaction shocked me because it didn't challenge what I felt. It confirmed it without pushing, without pressure, without opinion disguised as concern. She trusted the calm that trust meant more than approval ever could. I left that conversation without adrenaline, without urgency, without needing to call you immediately and report what happened. I just carried the certainty with me, the way you carry something fragile that doesn't actually need protection. That's how I knew this was different. When you don't feel the need to convince anyone, not even yourself. If you're listening to this and something here resonates, it's probably because you've experienced a moment like this too. A quiet confirmation that didn't come from excitement but from recognition. If this reflection made you pause, take a moment to like this video. If you appreciate calm, honest stories like this, subscribe. And if you've ever had a conversation that quietly changed how you saw everything, leave a comment, even a simple one. Some reactions don't shock you because they're dramatic. After that conversation with my mom, I didn't rush to interpret it. I didn't replay every sentence, looking for hidden meaning. That surprised me. Usually moments like that trigger analysis, but this one didn't. Like something that didn't need to be processed because it had already found its place. I noticed how calm followed me for the rest of the day. Not the calm that comes from relief, but the kind that comes from alignment. The kind that doesn't fade when you're alone with your thoughts. That's how I knew her reaction mattered more than I initially realized. I kept thinking about that word she used, settled. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. And observations from someone who's watched your entire life carry a different weight. My mom has seen me excited about things that didn't last. She's seen me convinced about paths that later changed. She knows the difference between momentum and direction. Snorts, I realized something important then. I didn't tell my mom about you because I was seeking approval. I told her because something had crossed a threshold. When something, is still uncertain, you protect it, you keep it quiet. When it's stable, you let it exist openly. That's what I had done without realizing it. I also noticed how she didn't offer advice. That's rare for her. Advice usually comes when someone senses instability, when they feel the need to guide, warn, or prepare you. This time, she didn't guide me anywhere. She simply acknowledged where I already was. That silence was intentional. Later that evening, I replayed one part of the conversation, not because it troubled me, but because it clarified something. When she asked whether I was building or stabilizing, it reframed how I saw my own emotions. I wasn't trying to calm something chaotic. I wasn't managing uncertainty. I was adding structure to something that already worked. There's a difference between fixing and building. Fixing is reactive. Building is deliberate. I realized that being with you didn't feel like emotional work. It felt like emotional efficiency. Energy wasn't being spent on repair. It was being invested in presence. That's when things start compounding instead of leaking. I thought about how often people confuse love with effort. They believe struggle is proof of depth, but struggle often just means incompatibility being negotiated slowly. What I felt wasn't struggle, it was fit. Fit doesn't announce itself, it just removes friction. I also noticed how I didn't feel the urge to explain you to anyone else, not friends, not colleagues, not even myself. When mething is real, you don't market it, you don't package it into stories, you let it exist as it is. That's what I was doing. My mom's reaction also made me think about legacy, not in a dramatic sense, but in a grounded one. She didn't ask what you look like or what you did. She listened to how I sounded because she understands that tone reveals more than details ever will. Tone doesn't lie. And my tone wasn't elevated, it wasn't guarded, it wasn't hopeful or cautious, it was even. That evenness carried information. I realized that the question, "Will you marry me?" wasn't forming because I was imagining a future. It was forming because the present already felt stable enough to extend forward. Most people try to secure the future to feel safe in the present. This was the opposite. The present felt safe without security. That's rare. I also understood why her reaction shocked me. It removed doubt without adding pressure. Usually, conversations like that introduce a new variable, a new opinion, a new concern. This one simplified things instead of complicating them. Simplicity is a sign of truth. I didn't feel the need to tell you immediately what my mom said. Not because it wasn't important, but because it didn't change anything. It confirmed what already existed, and confirmations don't demand action. They allow patience. Patience feels different when it isn't tied to fear. I slept well that night, not because I was excited, but because nothing was unsettled. Sleep is honest. I T doesn't respond to ideas. It responds to emotional stability. And that night, stability was present. The next day, life continued normally. No dramatic shift, no emotional surge. And that was the final confirmation for me. When something important happens and life still feels functional, it means the foundation was already strong. Disruption usually signals weakness. Continuity signals strength. I realized that telling my mom about you wasn't a milestone. It was a checkpoint, a quiet one that didn't redirect me but confirmed the direction I was already moving in. Her reaction shocked me because it didn't try to influence the outcome. It trusted the process. And trust, coming from someone who's watched your entire evolution, carries a depth that words can't explain. I didn't feel like I needed to prove anything anymore. Not to her, not to anyone, not even to myself. That absence of proof-seeking changed how I carried the connection. It became lighter, not because it was fragile, but because it was no longer being tested. If you're listening and this feels familiar, it's probably because you've had a moment like this too. A quiet confirmation that didn't come with celebration, but with peace. Some realizations don't speed your heart up, they slow it down and let you breathe normally again. After a few days passed, I realized something else had shifted, and it wasn't obvious at first. Nothing in my routine had changed. My days looked the same, my responsibilities were still there. The pace of life didn't slow down or speed up, but underneath all of it, there was a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Not excitement, not anticipation, just a quiet sense of orientation. It felt like knowing where north is without checking a compass. I kept thinking about how my mom didn't try to guide the conversation toward a conclusion. She didn't ask where it was going or what I planned to do next. That restraint mattered. People usually ask those questions when they sense uncertainty. She didn't feel that need. She trusted where I already was. That trust stayed with me. It didn't push me to act. It didn't urge me to speak sooner or decide faster. It did the opposite. It gave me permission to stay exactly where I was and keep observing without pressure. Observation without pressure changes what you see. I noticed how little internal dialogue I had about the connection now, not because I stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to negotiate. No inner debate, no contingency planning, no emotional rehearsal. When your mind stops running simulations, it's usually because the environment doesn't require defense. That absence was telling. I paid attention to how I spoke about you to myself, not out loud internally. The tone was factual, not romanticized, grounded, not hopeful. There was no inflation, no minimization, just accuracy. And accuracy is what remains when illusions are gone. I realized that earlier in my life when I talked about someone, there was always an edge, either excitement that needed fuel or doubt that needed reassurance. This time, there was neither. There was no need to convince myself of anything. Conviction doesn't argue. I also noticed how I wasn't measuring progress anymore. I wasn't tracking conversations or moments as signs. That's something people do when they're trying to stabilize uncertainty. When something is stable, you stop tracking it. You stop checking whether it's still there. You trust that it is. The thought of my mom's question, are you building or are you still stabilizing, kept returning, but now it landed differently. I wasn't just building something with you. I was building on something with you. That distinction matters. Building something requires energy just to keep it upright. Building on something means the base already holds. That's when things scale. I also noticed how my patience had changed. It wasn't passive. It wasn't waiting for something to happen. It was confident, like knowing a system will work if left uninterrupted. I wasn't delaying action out of fear. I was allowing time to continue doing what it had already been doing well. I realized why my mom's reaction shocked me so deeply. It didn't introduce doubt, and it didn't introduce urgency. Most conversations do one or the other. They either complicate or accelerate. This one simplified and steadied. Simplicity is disarming when you're used to complexity. I also noticed something subtle in how I listened to other people after that conversation. I became more aware of how often excitement is confused for meaning, how often intensity is mistaken for depth. I could hear it in how people describe their relationships, always fluctuating, always reactive. The fluctuation wasn't present here. I didn't feel pulled, I didn't feel pushed, I felt aligned. Alignment doesn't demand constant attention, it stays operational even when focus shifts elsewhere. That's what makes it reliable. Reliability changes how you commit. I also thought about what it means to shock someone who knows you well. It doesn't come from surprise. It comes from recognition. My mom wasn't shocked because this was unexpected. She was shocked because it was unmistakable. That distinction stayed with me. I didn't feel the need to report back to her with updates. There was no sense of continuation needed. The conversation felt complete. Completion doesn't mean finality. It means nothing essential was left unresolved. That feeling extended outward. I noticed how even moments of uncertainty, normal, human uncertainty, didn't escalate into doubt. They passed without leaving residue. That's when I understood the difference between uncertainty and instability. Uncertainty can exist inside stable systems without causing damage. I also realized why I didn't rush to tell you about that conversation. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it wasn't performative. It wasn't something to use as reassurance or validation. It was internal alignment confirmed externally. Those confirmations don't need to be shared immediately. They change how you move, not what you say. I thought about how often people feel the need to announce certainty the moment they feel it. That urgency usually comes from fear. It might disappear. I didn't feel that fear. I trusted that if this was real, it would remain visible without being protected. And did. Days passed. Normal days. Nothing dramatic happened. And that continuity was the final signal. When something important integrates without disrupting life, it means it belongs there. Belonging doesn't create noise. I realized that telling my mom about you wasn't the start of something new. It was the acknowledgement of something already integrated. Her reaction shocked me because it confirmed what I had needed confirmation for, but respected enough to notice. That respect changed how I carried the connection. I wasn't holding it carefully. I wasn't guarding it. I was letting it exist naturally the way you let something live when you trust its design. If you're listening and this resonates, it's probably because you've experienced a moment where someone saw you clearly and instead of questioning your direction, they recognized it. Can they steady you? They steady you, and that's how you know they're real. By the time everything settled, I realized I wasn't carrying the conversation with my mom anymore. It was carrying me, not as a memory, but as a quiet reference point. Something I didn't have to revisit to feel sure. Something that stayed steady in the background while life continued forward. That's when I understood the real impact of her reaction. It didn't change my feelings, it didn't validate them, it didn't push them anywhere. It clarified the ground beneath them. Future decisions often feel heavy because they're built on uncertainty. It felt light not because it lacked weight, but because it was already supported. Like stepping onto a bridge you don't have to test because you can see how it was built. I noticed how differently I carried the idea of you after that. Not more protectively, not more cautiously, just more naturally. I wasn't afraid of saying your name internally anymore. I wasn't holding back thoughts, as if naming them would make them fragile. Fragile things require silence. Strong things tolerate visibility. That distinction stayed with me. I also noticed that I didn't feel the need to check in with myself anymore. I wasn't asking, is this still right, or do I still feel the same? I realized that my mom hadn't shocked me because she approved. She shocked me because she recognized. Recognition is deeper than approval. Approval can be withdrawn. Recognition just observes what's already there. She recognized a version of me that didn't need to explain himself. That recognition made something else clear. I wasn't trying to figure out my feelings anymore. I was respecting them. There's a difference. Figuring out implies uncertainty. Respect implies clarity. Respect doesn't rush. Advice often comes from wanting to prevent pain. She didn't sense risk. She sensed readiness. Readiness doesn't need protection. It needs space. And she gave me space. In that space, I noticed how my attention returned to normal life without resistance. Work didn't feel like avoidance. Distraction didn't feel like denial. Everything remained in balance. That's how I knew this wasn't emotional fixation. It was integration. Integration is quiet. Stop romanticizing the idea of telling people about you. Not because I was hiding anything, but because nothing needed announcement. When something fits, it doesn't need introduction. It simply exists. That's when I realized why her reaction stayed with me longer than expected. It didn't attach meaning to the future. It grounded meaning in the present. The present felt sufficient. I noticed how this affected my patience. I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. I wasn't expecting a turning point. I wasn't watching the clock. Time felt cooperative instead of adversarial. That's rare. Usually, time feels like something you're racing or resisting. Here felt like an ally. I also reflected on how often people feel the need to escalate relationships to make them feel real. Labels, milestones, declarations, those things have their place, but they're not foundations. They sit on foundations. When the foundation exists, escalation becomes optional, not urgent. That's where I was. I wasn't afraid of commitment. I wasn't craving it either. I was simply aware that nothing about the connection felt temporary. Temporary things create urgency. Permanent things allow patience. My mom sensed that without me saying it. That's what shocked me. She didn't hear excitement in my voice. She heard durability. She didn't hear uncertainty masked as hope. She heard calm, grounded in observation. Parents recognize patterns long before we articulate them ourselves. I realized that telling her about you wasn't a request for insight. It was a reflection of alignment. I wasn't asking, what do you think? I was unconsciously saying, this is where I am, and she responded accordingly. Wasn't a requested my stillness. The trust changed how I trusted myself. Not dramatically, not emotionally, structurally. I stopped bracing for change. I stopped anticipating disappointment. I stopped preparing backup explanations in case something shifted. Those behaviors fade when your nervous system recognizes safety. Not excitement, but safety. Safety doesn't dull you. It stabilizes you. I also noticed how this safety didn't make me passive. It made me deliberate. When you're not reacting, you can choose. When you're not managing chaos, you can plan calmly. That's when decisions start to feel like extensions of who you are, not risks you're taking. I realized then that the conversation with my mom didn't mark a beginning or an ending. Those moments don't happen often. When they do, they don't demand celebration. They ask for respect. So I respected it by not rushing, by not forcing conclusions, by letting life continue proving what was already evident. And life did. Days remained steady, emotions stayed proportional, presence remained consistent, nothing collapsed, nothing escalated unnecessarily, nothing required repair. That's how I knew this wasn't something to question anymore. My mom's reaction shocked me because it reflected a truth without trying to shape it. She didn't step into the story, she acknowledged it and stepped back. That restraint was the confirmation. Because when someone who knows your pattern sees a new one and doesn't warn you, you pay attention, and I did. Some conversations don't change your direction. They confirm it quietly, so you can walk forward without looking back. After everything else had settled, I realized something simple but important. I wasn't carrying doubt forward with me anymore, not because I had answers to every question, but because the questions themselves had softened. They no longer demanded resolution. They existed comfortably alongside certainty, and that's how I knew I wasn't guessing. I noticed how naturally I moved through my days now. There was no background tension, no internal checking, no quiet fear that something might shift unexpectedly. That kind of ease doesn't come from confidence alone. It comes from alignment that's been tested quietly and held. I thought again about my mom's reaction, not as a moment, but as a signal. She didn't respond to what I said, she responded to how I was toned can't, and she heard something stable in me that I hadn't fully named yet. That realization stayed with me, not as pressure, but as grounding. I wasn't rushing toward conclusions. I wasn't pulling away either. I was simply allowing the truth to keep behaving like truth, to keep showing up the same way when nothing special was happening, to remain intact under repetition, to stay recognizable without reinforcement. That consistency did more than reassure me. It reorganized how I valued things. I stopped needing emotional proof. I stopped waiting for signs. I stopped looking for moments that would confirm what was already clear. When something is real, it doesn't need to be proven repeatedly. It just needs to be observed honestly. And observation had done its work. I also noticed how my patience had changed. It was confident, like knowing a system will continue working even when you're not watching it closely. Trusted the process had already earned that trust. I realized why my mom's response mattered so much. It removed the last layer of noise without adding a new one. Most feedback complicates things. This simplified them. It stripped the situation down to what actually mattered and left everything unnecessary behind. Parity feels light because it carries less. I didn't feel the need to update anyone. I didn't feel the urge to announce where things were going. When something is stable, you don't broadcast it, you let it exist. Visibility doesn't threaten it. Silence doesn't weaken it. It holds on its own. I also noticed how this clarity didn't narrow my world. It expanded it. I became more present, more attentive, more deliberate. I wasn't distracted by uncertainty or pulled by anticipation. I was here fully, and that presence changed how everything else felt. Presence is often mistaken for intensity. It isn't. It's depth without noise. I understood then that this wasn't about a reaction or a conversation. It was about recognition. Recognition that something had crossed from possibility into reality quietly, without ceremony, without urgency. And once that happens, you don't go back to questioning whether it exists. You move forward respecting it. That's what I've been doing. I'm not protecting this from the world. I'm not shielding it from time. They don't depend on secrecy or pressure. They depend on integrity, integrity of behavior, integrity of presence, integrity of pace. And all of that has remained intact. So when I think back to that moment when I told my mom about you, I understand now why her reaction shocked me. And recognition, when it's honest, doesn't try to guide you. It steps aside and lets you continue forward with steadier footing. That's what this has done for me. I'm not standing at the beginning of a story or the end of one. I'm standing inside something that's already formed, something that doesn't need to be rushed or defended, something that just needs to be lived. Some truths don't arrive with excitement. They arrive with calm and stay long enough that you stop asking whether they're real. As I sit with this a little longer, I realize the most important thing that changed wasn't external at all. It was internal permission. Permission to stop second guessing something that had already proven itself through time. Permission to trust steadiness instead of chasing intensity. That kind of permission doesn't arrive from excitement. It arrives from calm that refuses to leave. I no longer feel like I'm carrying this understanding carefully. I'm carrying it confidently. There's a difference. Careful things feel fragile. Confident things feel settled. They don't need guarding. They don't need constant reassurance. They stay present even when attention shifts elsewhere. That's what this feels like now. I've noticed how my reactions have changed. I'm less reactive. Not because I care less, but because I trust more. When trust is present, you don't prepare for collapse. You respond to what's actually happening instead of what might happen. That shift alone changes how you move through everything. I also noticed how my expectations have softened, not lowered, but clarified. I'm not asking this connection to be everything. I'm allowing it to be exactly what it is. And what it is consistently is reliable. Reliability doesn't impress at first glance, but over time it becomes invaluable. I may feel the urge to define this with big words or dramatic promises. Labels have their place, but they're not foundations. Foundations are built from repeated behavior that doesn't contradict itself. What we have has been doing that quietly without instruction. That's why it holds. I think about how often people mistake peace for boredom because they're used to chaos feeling like passion. I understand that now. Peace isn't empty, it's spacious. It gives you room to think, to grow, to choose without pressure. That spaciousness is what I value most now. It's what allows life to keep moving forward without friction. I don't imagine the future as a series of milestones anymore. I imagine it as continuity, days that work, conversations that resolve, silences that don't need filling. That image doesn't feel small, it feels sustainable. Sustainability is what makes commitment possible without fear. Fear isn't present here. And when fear isn't present, decisions don't feel heavy, they feel natural, like stepping in the direction you're already facing. You don't have to convince yourself, you just move. That's how I'm moving now. I'm not trying to preserve a moment, I'm respecting a pattern. Patterns are harder to ignore because they repeat without asking permission. And repetition over time becomes truth. I don't need anything dramatic to happen next. I don't need confirmation wrapped in words. What's here doesn't need escalation to feel real. It needs time, and time has been consistent. That consistency is enough. So this is where I am not searching, not waiting, not doubting, just recognizing what has remained unchanged while everything else moved around it. That recognition doesn't demand urgency. It invites steadiness. Once chosen, quietly changes everything else that follows.